Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's Play Attention webinar. My name is Gwen Sorley, and I will be your host today. I really do appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your day to pause and reflect on a subject that is deeply personal for many women. And we're going to talk about ADHD, hormones, and dopamine. And so during this time, I want to really give yourself some time to reflect and communicate with others because you may have found yourself quietly asking, why can't I manage things the way I used to? Why am I suddenly forgetting simple things? Why do ordinary tasks seem so overwhelming? Why can't I make myself start, even when I know what to do? Why do my emotions feel so much closer to the surface? And perhaps the most painful question, what is wrong with me? So many of you have already stated that you can relate to some of these questions. And that one most painful question, what is wrong with me? And today I want us to replace that question with a much more useful one. And that question is, what has changed and what does my brain need now? That is the conversation we're going to have. We're going to take a look at ADHD, hormones, dopamine, sleep, stress, and executive function. Most importantly, we are going to talk about how to support yourself when the strategies that have carried you for years seem to no longer work. And I don't want this to be a lecture. I don't want to simply be talking at you. I want you to participate. I want you to recognize yourself in this conversation. I want you to share when you feel comfortable sharing. And whether you have an ADHD diagnosis, or perhaps you suspect that you have ADHD, or you have simply noticed changes in your focus, memory, motivation, or emotion regulation. So I want to really pause and take a moment to share some of our personal experiences because I think that's one of the things that we as women don't do often enough, right? We don't really pause and think about what has occurred lately, or what are we going through? We don't pause and reflect and really think about the why or what supports we need personally. We simply power through for a lot of us, right? So I want you to take this time. You've already blocked out 45 minutes to an hour of your own personal time. So I really want you to participate and let's share some of our personal experiences. So let's begin with a quick check-in. I want you to, and I'm going to go ahead and share a poll on my screen here. Let me launch that, and you should be able to see that poll right now on your screen. If you can't, you can just simply type your answers in the chat. But let's just start this time together with a quick check-in. I want you to finish this sentence. My brain lately feels. Okay. Is it foggy or scattered? Overwhelmed by simple tasks? Like your old systems are falling apart? Tired? Maybe even exhausted, but unable to sleep? Maybe your brain feels unpredictable or emotional. Many of you said foggy or scattered, 18% of you. 9% said overwhelmed. 9% said like my old systems are falling apart. Uh, 5% said tired but unable to sleep. Let's see, 5% said emotional. 9% said like I have 47 tabs open. But the most common response, 45% of you said all of the above. All of the above. And I want you to notice how many people are experiencing the same thing as you are, right? 45% of you said, my brain feels like all of this. I'm tired. I can't sleep. I'm emotional. I feel scattered or foggy. So everyone here, or most people here, are going through the same experiences that you are. So I want you to keep that in mind, that you are not the only person who has ever walked into a room and completely forgotten why you're there, right? You're not the only person who has ever opened an email, planned to respond, became distracted, and then discovered that same exact email 2 weeks later unanswered. You're not the only person who's looked directly at an object and then spent 10 minutes trying to find it. And you're not the only person who has sat in front of a simple task and you know how to do the task, but you simply feel completely unable to start. And you are certainly not the only person who has thought, I used to be able to handle that. So what's happened? What's changed? Do any of you right now start questioning yourself? You can type in yes or raise your hand. Have you been thinking about that yourself? I used to be able to handle all of this. What's happened? Yeah, Ellie and Toby, many of you are saying yes. So, what you're experiencing, Sandra says yes, and Anne says yes, I have anxiety. Absolutely. And because of that, right? I think a lot of people, Anne Marie, can really relate to that. But what you're experiencing is not a loss of intelligence or effort. You know, many of you here today, you know it's not a lack of effort because many of you are working incredibly hard. So it's not a loss of intelligence or effort or an ability. Your brain may be simply operating under different combination of hormonal changes, sleep disruptions, stress, responsibilities, and executive function demands. When we interpret a brain-based difficulty as a personal failure, we usually respond with shame, right? Many of you here today that have been experiencing this, you may be just responding with shame or anxiety, like Anne Marie said. But when we understand, when we take that moment, and that's why I think it's really important today that you're engaged and you take a moment to reflect, because when you understand what may be contributing to these feelings, to that feeling that I used to be able to handle it. So what's changed? We can respond with support. When we understand it, we can respond with support. And that is the distinction and that we're going to really focus on today during our time together. Rita said that sleep disruptions have definitely been occurring lately. And that, Rita, is really important. We're going to talk even a little bit further into the webinar. We're going to talk about sleep specifically. So, which one, and again, we're just taking a little bit of time right now to reflect, which one feels most familiar? And you can type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. What feels most familiar to you right now? I forget what I was about to do. I know what to do, but I can't make myself start. My emotions feel close to the surface. My usual systems are falling apart. I feel exhausted, but cannot consistently sleep, or all of the above. Which feels most familiar to you right now? And I'm just going to give you some time to respond in the chat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. All right, excellent. Many of you are saying, I know what to do, but I can't make myself start. Many of you are citing the emotions. Absolutely. Probably the most common, Justice, Jill, see, Len, many of you are saying, Joan, many of you are saying all of the above, right? Many of you are feeling all of this, that all of this is familiar. And what are these areas? Do you know? I forget what I was about to do. I know what to do, but I can't make myself start. My emotions are close to the surface. Do any of you know what these mental processes are associated with? Okay, a couple of you guessed correctly. These are executive functions, right? Executive functions are your mental processes that help you get things done every single day. And we're going to talk a little bit more about executive function as we go throughout this webinar. And my background is in education, and I've been with play attention and using play attention with my clients to improve executive function for over 30 years now. So I'm very familiar with adults, especially female adults, who are struggling in a different way with executive function. And many of you have this familiarity with these struggles right now. And so many of you said it's not just one thing, right? All of the above. And that combination that you're recognizing is really important because attention difficulties rarely exist on their own. It usually is, like you see on your screen right now, it's a combination. There's all this overlap because you may be dealing with, like what Rita said, that interrupted sleep. You may be experiencing hot flashes or night sweats, or maybe your work responsibilities have increased. I know that many women that I work with, they are now at that time in their careers where they've been doing really well, but now they have a harder workload, a heavier workload, because now they are supervisors. So your job responsibilities may have increased. You may be caring for children and you think to yourself, but I've had children for many years. So why has that changed? Because many of you may be caring for not only children, but also aging parents at the same exact time. Maybe your body feels unfamiliar, and perhaps you have less time to recover in between demands. And perhaps you are carrying the emotional weight of wondering why you no longer feel like yourself. And I know many of you here feel that way. And I can certainly relate where you think, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just don't feel like myself. And it's almost difficult to articulate to other people. But I think today you're with a community who really can understand. Anne Marie says, so much more stress with retirement, parents, etc. Rita says, but menopause was 23 years ago, though I just turned 65 a week ago. Mhm. But you still have probably changes in your responsibilities, right? You're not that person you were 25 years ago. You're not in that same time of your life. And these factors can pile on. All of those factors that we just looked at, that overlap, they really start to create what I call the pile on effect. You do not sleep well. And because you do not sleep well, then your working memory and attention are less reliable, right? Because in order to have great memory and great attention, you have to get good sleep. But now you didn't sleep well. So your working memory and your attention are negatively impacted. And because your working memory and your attention is strained, then you forgot to do something important. Maybe you missed an appointment. And because you forgot it, then you become so frustrated with yourself. And that frustration makes it harder to move on, right? Because now you're frustrated, you're having that emotional response, and now your mental flexibility, which is another part of executive function, is making it really difficult for you to move on to the next task. And then, since you cannot move on to the next task, what happens? You fall behind. And now that you've fallen behind, your stress level has increased. So now, with this pile on effect, your brain has fewer resources available for focusing, planning, remembering, and regulating emotions. None of these pieces exist in isolation. So there's a real emotional part of this experience that we want to acknowledge. It's not only frustrating to forget something, it can be frightening to feel that you can't depend on yourself in the same way, right? Many women have said to me, I used to remember everyone's schedule. I used to manage 10 things at once. I used to be the person that everyone relied on. I used to be able to push through. I know for me, I talk to so many people throughout the day. I do lots of consultations and meetings, and I used to be able to remember everything about that meeting or that consultation. And now I find that I can't remember everything in the same way I used to. So that phrase, I used to, can also carry some grief. You may feel as though you've lost a version of yourself. And so I want you to just take a moment, and you don't have to type this in, but you certainly can. But I want you to take a moment and really privately or type in the chat if you want to share, complete that sentence. I used to be able to. And you don't have to share your answer, but just notice what comes to mind. And if you do want to share, you can. But the biggest thing, I need you to take this moment, turn off your social media, and just focus on you. I used to, Toby says, take on all challenges, right? Ellie says, feel effective and needed, right? I'm sure you have similar feedback. C says, juggle everything well, right? We're used to doing it all, aren't we? But something has changed. And it doesn't mean you're failing, but it does mean that we need to recognize it. So I want to offer you a different perspective. Because right now, and I think Rita, you did this because you talked about the past, the 23 years ago. And I want you to really think about this in a different perspective. You may be comparing your current brain to a version of yourself who had different hormones, different sleep, different responsibilities, and a different amount of available energy. Are any of you doing that? If you really take some time to think about it, are you comparing your brain to a version of yourself who perhaps was 30 years old? And that 30-year-old version of yourself, right, that younger you, had fewer physical symptoms, wasn't caring for aging parents and children simultaneously, could stay up really late and recover more easily. And maybe when you were 30, you were using anxiety and urgency to push yourself without recognizing how much those strategies were costing you. Joan says, absolutely. Rita says, oh, yes, certainly. Much more physical energy was a huge piece of that. Yeah. So your goal here today, and as we carry throughout our days moving forward with this different perspective, your goal is to not shame yourself into being that person you were at 30 years old, right? Because that's not going to happen. Your goal is to understand what your brain needs now at this age and as you move forward. So that doesn't mean that you're going to lower expectations of yourself, but it does mean that you're going to replace punishment with information. And that is our goal today. Anne Marie says, wait, anxiety isn't the only motivator? No, Anne Marie, no. And that anxiety has a personal cost, as I'm sure you know. And we're going to be talking about those different motivators, as you're referring it to, right here. So, how have you been trying to hold things together, your invisible support system? These may have been your coping strategies. Anne Marie says anxiety is the motivator. So before we move on to hormones, let's look at the systems that you may have been using or you may be using today in order to hold everything together. Perhaps you've been relying on urgency, right? I have so many of my clients who will say, I do better when I'm under the gun, when I have so much stress and I have that deadline, I have to meet that deadline. So I don't do anything for days and weeks, but then when that deadline is there, it creates enough pressure so that I can act. So is that your support system? It may be perfectionism. You may be checking and rechecking because a mistake just simply feels unbearable. And you can go ahead and type in the chat box which feels most familiar to you. Is it urgency? Is it that perfectionism? Is it people pleasing? I know many of us are really guilty of this one, people pleasing. You say yes to everything and everyone because disappointing someone feels worse than overloading yourself. How many of you are that person, the people pleaser? Maybe you're working, maybe your strategy is brute force, right? You work really late into the night just to keep up. Okay. Anne Marie says she does everything, whatever avoids regret later. Ellie says perfectionism. And remember, perfectionism and ADHD go hand in hand. That is something that is very common. Or are you trying to keep everything in your head instead of writing it down? Thomas says brute force and people pleasing for sure. Rita says, I think it's also a matter of not remembering to start things earlier. I help organize a large weekend dance with lots of admin tasks to do. I could be doing that some of that today, but I don't think about it. Exactly. Right. You don't even think about it. That working memory is compromised. Okay. Many of you are saying brute force and people pleasing, perfectionism. So Joan says, brute force, poor sleep night after night is killing me. It is, Joan, and we really need to focus on that. Do you know that you say poor sleep night after night is killing me? Did you know that the CDC has actually put a warning on night shift work? Because those night shift people who work the night shift, they get poor sleep. They have dysregulated sleep patterns and they have higher rates of cancer. So they have actually, the CDC has declared that that night shift is actually carcinogenic. It may lead to cancer. So it is so critically important to everything that we try to regulate that sleep. Okay. Anna says being able to keep everything in my head, except I can't do that anymore. Exactly. And I've noticed that with myself as well. So here is something important to keep in mind. We've looked at all of these different strategies that you've been using, but a coping strategy can be effective, right? You think, well, it works for me, right? If I wait till the very last minute when I'm stressed and anxious, that really works for me. But even if it works, it can still be very expensive. So, anxiety, for example, I think it was Anne Marie brought up that anxiety. It may help you remember an appointment, but it can also prevent you from resting. Perfectionism, many of you said perfectionism is your support system, and it may help you avoid making mistakes, but it may keep your nervous system in a constant state of tension. People pleasing may protect relationships temporarily, but it may leave no time or energy for yourself. And working late into the night may help you complete tasks, but then it makes the following day a lot harder, right? So these strategies were not, they're not, I should say, evidence that you're doing anything wrong. They were intelligent adaptations at the time. You found ways to function in a world that expected your brain to operate differently. But a strategy that worked under one set of conditions may not work for you when those conditions change. And they do have a cost associated with them. Okay. So, as you know, many of you here today, you may have been diagnosed with ADHD, or you may just be looking into an ADHD diagnosis, or maybe you're just simply struggling with attention and memory, and you don't really have or particularly want a diagnosis officially. But I bet many of you here today, and you can raise your hand or chat yes or the time that you were diagnosed. How many of you received a late diagnosis of ADHD? Okay. Oh, a lot of people are typing in. Jennifer says just this year. Rita says I was 52. Many of you are saying yes. Late 40s. Maxanne was in her late 40s. Toby, age 70. Anne Marie, 51. Anna, a therapist just suggested diagnosis at 45. C says in her 70s. Jill, 50s. Right? So many of us here were diagnosed at much later time in life, right? And it's really Jolene says just a couple of weeks ago at 45. And so ADHD oftentimes looks very different in women. And thankfully, the criterion has changed. You know, we went from that ADHD where it's that hyperactive little boy. We no longer have that one perspective. We know that it's very different for all individuals, but especially for women. And these quiet struggles that women have can be very significant. So it's important to keep in mind. Joan says she was diagnosed at age 56. It's important to keep in mind that ADHD is a developmental condition involving persistent difficulties with attention, activity regulation, or impulse control. And because it is developmental, ADHD does not suddenly begin during menopause, right? Menopause does not cause ADHD. It may exacerbate some of your symptoms, but it doesn't cause ADHD. If you look back historically, you may have been missed early on. Rita says she was the hyperactive little girl inside her head, right? You weren't outwardly hyperactive. It was you were maybe the daydreamer, right? A lot of women and girls and were some girls weren't disruptive, right? They may have sat quietly while their minds wandered, right? They may have been the daydreamer. And you may have heard this about yourself growing up. You were described as just overly sensitive or disorganized or just really talkative, chatty, anxious, just overly emotional or not living up to your potential, right? That's how a lot of women were really identified for years. So they may say that um, as adults, you may even appear to be successful and organized, but that success may come at a very high personal cost, right? Anne Marie says she was identified as too sensitive, uh, weird, deep thoughts. Ugh, potential sentence. Oi. Toby, I was the daydreamer and the crybaby. Oh my goodness. So we've had these experiences, right, as young females or children. And as adults, you may appear to be successful and organized. But that success, like I was just saying, may come at a really high personal cost. So you might find yourself saying, I get everything done, but I'm exhausted. Or I can manage work, but then by the time I get home, I've been working so hard, much harder than my peers, that when I get home, I have nothing left. Or I can look organized because I'm terrified of forgetting something, or I'm terrified of someone finding out that I'm actually struggling. Or you may be saying, I can't relax because I am constantly reviewing what I may have missed. So a woman may compensate successfully for years. You may have had certain systems in place and you've been compensating, but then all of a sudden, hormones change, your sleep isn't as good as it used to be. As we mentioned earlier, you have increased responsibilities, you have accumulated stress, and it makes all of your executive function challenges harder to hide. And this may be why some of you have gotten this late ADHD evaluation, right? You got this evaluation later in life because those strategies, those coping skills you were using early on to compensate, they worked, but now you're going through all these life changes. And now these executive function challenges are becoming apparent not only to you, but others around you. So it may be why many of you are just getting your diagnosis now. Okay. It does not mean that you suddenly developed ADHD because, as we mentioned, this is something that you've carried throughout your lifetime, but the symptoms may have been exacerbated by these changes in hormones and life changes, so that the systems that once helped you compensate are no longer providing enough support. Okay. So, what's changed? What really happens? Let's look at a few different terms. Okay. Menopause is reached after a person has gone through 12 consecutive months without a menstrual period. Okay. Perimenopause is that transitional period leading up to menopause. And we want to really focus right here because that perimenopause may continue for several years. Some of you, I think many of you here right now are experiencing this. And during that time, hormone levels can fluctuate considerably during this time. I'm going to say that one more time. Hormone levels fluctuate considerably during this time. And that fluctuation really is important to consider because hormonal transition is not a smooth, predictable decline. You may feel relatively well for several weeks, and then suddenly you notice changes in sleep or mood or energy or concentration or emotion regulation, right? You feel fine, and then all of a sudden you notice all of these changes. Or you might think, we had a really good week. I thought I had all of this solved. I thought I resolved all of these challenges I was going through. But why am I struggling again? Or maybe you're thinking, my planning system worked perfectly on Monday. Why can't I use it today? Right? And the answer may not be that your discipline between Monday and Thursday has changed, but your internal conditions may be different. Okay. So many people report, and I think a lot of you here can relate that many individuals report changes in sleep, energy, memory, concentration, mood, temperature regulation, physical comfort, stress tolerance. These symptoms can overlap with ADHD, right? So if there's that overlap, because these hormonal changes are causing changes in your energy and memory and concentration, those symptoms overlap with ADHD. So it's really difficult to know where one ends and the other begins, right? And oftentimes, more often than not, it's not one simple cause. So let's look at this ecosystem of executive function. We're going to look at estrogen, dopamine, and executive function. Okay, we're going to look at that important connection. Uh, oh, I'm glad. Thank you, Rita. I appreciate that. I hope that everyone's learning a little bit and actually taking a moment to reflect on all of this information because like I said, I think many of us don't take the time to just reflect. Okay? So let's look at dopamine to start. That's the middle cog, right? Dopamine is a neurochemical messenger involved in attention, motivation, reward, learning, movement, and the brain's decision about where to direct your effort. So, if you're thinking about dopamine, an easy way to maybe think about dopamine is it helps your brain respond to questions such as, is this important? Is this interesting? Is there a reward? Should I continue? Where should I direct my energy? Okay. And I've heard this a lot in my work that I've done over the past many years with individuals with ADHD. And a lot of people will say that people with ADHD have no dopamine. And that's not really accurate. The relationship is much more complex and it involves how dopamine is produced, released, received, and then regulated within different brain networks. So estrogen, so we have dopamine, right? That neurochemical that's answering all of those important questions for the brain. And then you have estrogen, which interacts with multiple systems in the brain, including systems involving dopamine. And research suggests that changing estrogen levels may influence the dopamine signaling and cognitive processes involving the prefrontal cortex. What cognitive processes are supported by the prefrontal cortex? We've already touched on it. Many of you are typing in the correct answer. Yes, the prefrontal cortex helps support our executive functions. And what is executive function? Those are our ability to plan and organize, avoid procrastination, remain on task, control our attention, our emotions, shifting that mental flexibility. So these are the mental processes. Our executive function are those mental processes that help us move throughout our day. So therefore, changes in estrogen may place additional strain on these systems, and particularly for people with ADHD or weak executive function. So if you think about that, if your estrogen, if you have these fluctuation in your hormones, it's placing a strain on these systems. And if you are already struggling with ADHD or weak executive function, then you may be experiencing even more challenges. Okay. And it's not going to affect everyone in the same way, right? Brain chemistry is not that simple. Changes in estrogen levels may influence dopamine signaling and may make attention, motivation, working memory, and emotion regulation feel less reliable for many of you. But it's not going to be the same experience for everyone. But it is a connection that we need to be aware of, and that a lot more research and a lot more information needs to be provided. So we've talked about how dopamine and estrogen is interacting, and then it may actually negatively impact our executive function. But if it's negatively impacting executive function, what does that look like for you on the day-to-day basis? Well, one of the executive functions that many of us talk about is working memory. So if you think right now, what does that look like for you in your day to day, right? For many of us, that is the fact that you may walk into a room and you have absolutely no idea why you are in that room. You know you went into that room for a reason, right? But you have absolutely no idea why you're there. That's a lapse of working memory. Or maybe conversations are getting difficult. You may have this great story to tell a group of friends or family members. And so you start talking and you're telling this story, and then midway through the story, you completely lose your track, your thought process, right? Does that happen to any of you? Where you think midway through your story, that's all I got, right? Because you've suddenly had this lapse of working memory. Chelsea says, finding out that I had ADHD and then that estrogen and progesterone fluctuates during the weeks before my period was nice to know about, but annoying to have. At least now I know why. You're more sensitive, sleepy, and more Netflix prone, right? Exactly. It is, it is about knowledge, exactly. It may be annoying, but there are some steps we can take too, Chelsea. So, working memory is one of those things that can be really strained, and you're recognizing that in your day to day. Crystal says it happens all the time. I'm afraid of dementia if this is my normal. And Crystal, that that cognitive decline is not part of normal aging. And we're going to talk a lot about that as well. And we actually, within Play Attention, have Silver Minds, which is an enhancement to our Play Attention program so that we can support the aging brain in different ways. And if you want more information of that, Crystal, just type in Silver Minds and I'll make certain that you get more information about that part of the Play Attention program. So working memory shows up in different ways, right? You lose your train of thought. You struggle with conversations. Task initiation, that's an executive function. So task initiation may be incredibly difficult for you, and you sit down and you think, I absolutely know what I need to do. But for some reason, I cannot seem to get started on anything, right? That's how it shows up in your day to day. And emotion regulation. I think, Toby, you brought up emotions earlier on. Emotion regulation is one of those mental processes within executive function. So that may be that you're really quick to respond, right? Seems like you don't have any impulse control and you are quick to respond with anger or annoyance, or maybe you're teary. Maybe you cry very easily because that frustration level. Or you might be really sensitive to noise. That might be something that's showing up for you. So it's important to connect that all of these changes that you've been going through is negatively impacting the frontal lobes and your ability to really control the executive functions. So I mentioned that we were going to talk about sleep, and this is where we're going to look at sleep just for a moment here, because I want you to remember this graphic, okay? For those of you who said that sleep is a real concern, I want you to look at that battery and remember this, okay? Because sleep deserves special attention. Many people who experience sleep disruptions during perimenopause or menopause, you have hot flashes, night sweats, physical discomfort, maybe anxiety, changing sleep patterns, or insomnia. They all interfere with restorative sleep. And even though we know that's occurring and we're having challenges with sleep, we expect our brain to perform normally the next day. We expect ourselves to still be focused and remember and plan and make decisions and regulate emotions and complete everything on our list. This is an enormous request from your exhausted brain. If you think about your brain as kind of like your phone battery, right? Think about your phone. When your battery is down to 12%, you do not expect your phone to work at 100%, right? It's down to 12%. So you close applications, you lower the brightness, or you stop streaming videos. You turn on low power mode, or you may go and look for your charger. But when our own energy level, because of lack of sleep, goes down to 12%, what do we do to ourselves? Do we give ourselves a moment? No. We agree to another responsibility. We skip lunch. We push through the fatigue. We stay up later to catch up. And then we criticize ourselves for moving slower, right? You are a human nervous system, and you are not a machine with unlimited capacity. So, lower energy requires more careful use of attention. It doesn't require more criticism. So I really do want sleep to be one of those things that you start looking at and start looking at a sleep hygiene routine that will help you get better sleep. And that may be a webinar that we should do next, is to really focus on sleep. And if you're interested in some more information on sleep, you can type that in the chat box and we'll keep that in mind for one of our upcoming webinars, because that is a whole webinar in and of itself. So let's just take a quick 60-second reset because we have gone through a lot of information right now. Let's give ourselves a moment to pause. Okay, so do this little exercise with me if you would. Place both feet on the floor if that's comfortable for you. Allow your shoulders to lower. Okay, unclench your jaw. Don't stress. Unclench your jaw. Rest your hands. You don't have to close your eyes, but you can simply soften your gaze or close your eyes if you'd like to. Now, I want you to breathe in slowly through your nose and breathe out a little bit slower than you breathed in. Okay. Now breathe in and breathe out. One more time, breathe in. And as you breathe out, imagine setting down one thing that you have been carrying today. You don't have to solve it during this webinar. You can return to it later if it still belongs to you. Just let one thing go. So notice whether in that little 60-second reset, if anything shifted. Perhaps your shoulders lowered, your breathing slowed. Maybe nothing dramatic happened, but that's okay. The purpose was not to force yourself to feel calm. The purpose was to interrupt the pattern long enough to really give yourself time to notice what is happening. It's a useful reset. And that useful reset does not have to require an hour. Sometimes it just begins with giving yourself 60 seconds to reset and be aware. Okay. So I want you to think now about one strategy that maybe you've depended on for years. It might be waiting for urgency, keeping everything in your head, saying yes to everything, doing everything yourself. And I want you to think, because we talked about those strategies earlier, okay? I want you to think, does that strategy still work? Okay, as we're kind of wrapping up our time together, does that strategy still work? What does it cost me? What might support me better now? And you don't have to have the full answer, right? So think about one thing. Do you want to keep that strategy? Do you want to change the strategy or release it? Many of you are saying change. So you don't want to necessarily release it, but so many of you are saying change. Okay. And that's important. So no longer are you going to shame yourself for it not working anymore, right? But you're understanding yourself and you're going to change it a little bit. You're going to tweak it because you're not that 30-year-old, right? You're no longer that same person. So we're not really throwing all our strategies out, but we are understanding where we are now, and we're going to make some changes accordingly. Okay. So some sustainable supports that might work for you is, of course, stop trying to store everything in the brain, right? So use not 30 notebooks, but a notebook, an app that works. Writing things down is not failing, right? It's giving yourself the support that you need. All right. Shrinking the start. If you have a list of things you want to accomplish and you say, I have to do my taxes, I have to exercise more, I have to be better at my nutrition. Those are not to-dos, those are categories. So shrinking, so that sounds overwhelming, right? I have to exercise more. That's a category. That's not a to-do item. Shrink it. If that is, I need to exercise more, maybe shrink that start to, I'm going to put my sneakers next to the front door. That's it. I'm going to put my sneakers there. The next day, maybe I'll put them on. The next day, maybe I'll put them on and I'll walk down to the mailbox. So shrink your start. Don't overwhelm yourself with categories. And also reduce the number of decisions you have to make because so many of you here today are suffering from decision fatigue. You have too much in front of you and too many decisions to make. So, reducing the number of decisions you have to make. So, if you're thinking about your nutrition, maybe on Sunday night, you just set a little time aside to prepare 3 meals that you can put into the refrigerator. So you don't have to think about your dinner for the next 3 days, right? You took that decision out of the mix. And we have a great recorded webinar that we did on decision making and ADHD. If you want me to send you the recording of that, I would be happy to send you. And you can just type in decisions in the chat box, and I'll make certain that you get that. Okay, so we've talked about, what the strategies we can use that work. And I know you're thinking about those strategies, but there's often a gap between knowing and doing, right? And we need some more supports because you can create a beautiful to-do list, but if you don't have the mental skills to actually start number one and stay on number one until you complete it, if you have weak executive function, some of these strategies that you're putting into place still are going to be challenging for you. So we want the strategies. We want you to have those in your toolbox, but then we also have to get to the root cause and start developing those skills like sustained attention and impulse control and filtering distractions. We need to develop those skills so that all of those strategies work for you. And that's what we do within Play Attention. As I said, I've been using Play Attention with my clients for 30 years, since 1996, actually. So I've worked with many individuals using our neurotechnology. That's this body wave armband that actually monitors your brain activity that tells us how attentive you are. And then that information is given over to the computer so that we can start developing these skills. So all of those strategies that you're putting into place will work for you. Okay, so it's really two part. It's having strategies in the toolbox and then developing skills so that the strategies work. And that's what we do within Play Attention. So I really invite you to, if you haven't already started your Play Attention program, and some of you here, I know our current Play Attention clients, but if you'd like to look into how we can actually develop a Play Attention, a customized Play Attention program for you, and what that would look like to have developing skills so that you can have strong executive function, we'd be happy to do a consultation with you and allow you to actually see our neurotechnology in real time and how that will work for you. So I want you to take a moment, okay, before we move on to the rest of our day, because we've talked a lot about things today, but I want you to think about, before we move on, your personal plan. Okay, you might jot this down. You can type it in your phone if you want, or you can type it in the chat box. But I want you to make a personal plan before you leave today. And I'd be happy to send this to you so you can reflect. Complete this sentence. Instead of criticizing myself for, I will support myself by. So, for example, instead of criticizing myself for forgetting appointments, I'm going to support myself by entering them into a calendar immediately. Or instead of criticizing myself for not beginning, I'll support myself by choosing a 2-minute first step. That's what I want you to walk away with today. I hope that this webinar gave you some information that maybe you didn't have previously, or maybe you hadn't taken the time to really reflect and understand what you're going through today and put some supports in place. Okay? So I want you to remember that you're not failing. Your brain is simply operating under different conditions, and it may now need a different level of support, and that's okay. So, as you continue to think about your personal plan, I want to put up some next steps that we're happy to help you with. And I'm going a little bit fast towards the end because I chatted way too much and we went a little bit over our time. But if you wanted to find out more about Silver Minds that I brought up earlier, that is our a division of Play Attention that offers an enhancement for the aging brain. So you can type in Silver Minds. I know a lot of you already have. If you are just not sure about the executive function skills that you're struggling with and you want to really see what a customized plan would look like, type in ADHD test and we'll send you our online assessment. If you want to just take some time to reflect on some of the areas that you're struggling with, and we'll send you our online assessment. Or if you would like to request a consultation, we'd be happy to schedule a time with you so that we can talk through some of these areas where you're struggling and then talk about how we can look at those different areas and actually customize a Play Attention program to start developing skills that, again, will improve executive function. So, Silver Minds, ADHD test, or if you'd like to request a consultation, and actually, as we log out, the consultation page will come up on your screen. So, just type in what you would like. Rita says, is the assessment to find out which executive functions are not functioning? We have a couple of different assessments. The ADHD test online is good, but it really is just going to ask you simple questions about where you're struggling, and then that gives us areas that we can look at and what we would put into a customized play attention plan. We also have, as an additional add-on, Rita, which might be really interesting for you and a lot of different individuals, is the executive function assessment. And we do that, it's an executive function questionnaire that we do through NovoPsych. And I really personally love this assessment because it really pinpoints the different areas of executive function. And then we get a great visual. This is planning. This is task initiation. This is emotion regulation. And where do you fall? Right. And that gives us a nice starting point to work from. If you want to do that more in-depth questionnaire with a 30-minute follow-up with one of us, one of our advisors here, um, just type in executive function test or executive function assessment, and I'll make certain to reach out to you personally with that more in-depth assessment. Now, the assessment is $50, but it does come with that 30 to 45-minute follow-up where we go through all of the different areas. So it's a little bit more in-depth than just the ADHD online test. If you truly want a deeper dive into executive function, I would recommend that. And I'd be happy to reach out to you. Chelsea says, "Oh, I'd love to find out which executive functions aren't functioning." Exactly. But I think that assessment, and like I said, I'd be happy to reach out to you and provide that information. They are norm referenced, so we do need, we can send you all the information on how to register for the executive function assessment, but then I'll follow up because we will need your date of birth because they're norm referenced. And this really does give us a nice overview of where we can work. What can we really focus on? All right. And then I would recommend a consultation too if you want to talk about how do I improve these skills? Because that's what our neurotechnology does, that customized program to actually work on very specific skills that are required for strong executive function. All right. I have talked a lot. I'm sure I have worn out my welcome. And it's time for us to move on to the rest of our day. I am so happy to have spent this time with you. And I do appreciate, like I said earlier, I know it's difficult to take some time out of your day. So I do appreciate you taking some time out to talk a little bit more about this very important topic.